Sup, guys?
All right, we're doing chapter 5, and Rosine is going to do the memory verse.
Pajamas.
We're not here for the pajamas. We're here for the memory verse. Come on.
But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed.
1 Samuel
2:30.
2:30.
Why is there... Mom,
Okay.
I need you to explain why the bee is here.
We are reading Liddell Chapter 5.
But why is there a bee?
Rosine wants to know why there is a bee, because it's the second part of the verse. It's a long verse, so it's the second part of the verse, not the first part of the verse. All right. Against all odds, the day after the opening ceremony was Sunday. Not just any Sunday, but the Sunday Eric had refused to run on. One sec. Okay. Harold Abrahams, a student at Cambridge University, lined up with the other contestants to try to qualify for the 100-meter finals for Great Britain. Meanwhile, Eric Liddell was nowhere to be seen. Eric was at the Scots Kirk Church across town as the heats for the 100-meter sprint were being raced. Eric was giving one of his talks to the congregation. When he came out of church, he heard the good news that Harold Abrahams had won his heat and was entered in the final of the following day. Eric was thrilled at the news. Maybe Great Britain would get her gold after all. And that is, turn the page, just what happened. The next day, Eric was in the stadium cheering for Harold Abrahams as Harold streaked past the field and won in a great time, 10.6 seconds. Harold was the first European ever to win a gold medal in the event. Eric clapped and whistled along with everyone else. As the Union Jack was raised over Columns Stadium and God Save the King was played, Eric stood proudly watching as the gold medal was hung around Harold Abraham's neck. But along with national pride, Eric felt a tinge. What?
She's in the bathroom.
Oh, Mustafa wants to know who I'm reading to. I'm reading to my students. And Rosine can still hear me. Eric felt, but along with the national pride, Eric felt a tinge of sadness. Perhaps it could have been he standing there receiving the medal. Yet he didn't regret his decision not to run on a Sunday. Of course, the fact that Great Britain had won the desired gold medal helped him feel better about things. At last, he hoped the press would stop printing horrible stories about him and he could finally concentrate on the events he would be running in. That night, Eric slept soundly at the Hotel du Louvre, and he was up early the next morning to make sure he got a ride to the stadium in time for his race. Already, several athletes in Paris for the games had endured the heartbreaking situation of not finding a taxi or a private car willing to take them to the stadium in time for them to compete in their events. I can't imagine. Eric made it to the stadium in plenty of time. He strolled out of the dressing room, clad in the British track uniform, baggy white shorts that flapped around his knees, and a white top with short sleeves. He began to limber up for the qualifying heat for the 200-meter race. Harold Abrahams was running in the same heat. Finally, the runners were called to the starting line. As soon as the starting pistol sounded, Eric and Harold streaked down the track, and they both qualified for the final. People who knew a lot about running, though, gave neither Eric nor Harold much hope for ending up among the first three finishers in the final. The American runners in the final were the hot favorites to win all the medals. As Eric Liddell and Harold Abrahams lined up for the 200-meter final, 4 other men were lined up beside them. All 4 were from the United States. When the starter's gun cracked, the other runners got off to a great start. Eric, however, was slow off the mark, but in the dash for the finish line, he managed to overtake Harold Abrahams and 2 of the Americans. The other 2 Americans had crossed the line ahead of him, but Eric had won the bronze medal for Great Britain. Harold Abrahams had finished last. The result of the 200-meter final left no doubt in anyone's mind that the Americans were the best runners at the Games and would likely win the other events as well, especially the 400-meter race. However, there was a runner that the Swiss had a strong There was a rumor that the Swiss had a strong runner entered in the 400 meters who might be able to challenge for a medal. Great Britain might have a chance at winning a medal if Guy Butler had not hurt his leg just before the games. Butler had won a silver medal in the event at the Antwerp Games in 1920. The British coaches had bandaged up his injured leg so that he could run, but it was too painful for him to crouch at the start of the race. Guy Butler would have to start from standing position, making it very unlikely that he could win a medal. Eric was also entered in the race, but 400 meters wasn't his normal race distance, and no one gave him any chance of winning a medal. The heats for the 400-meter race were held on Thursday, the hottest day so far at the Games. The temperature rose to 45 degrees Celsius. That's 113 degrees Fahrenheit. That's extremely hot. The heat didn't normally bother Eric. Like most runners, he liked the hot weather because it tended to make the muscles soft and flexible. But this weather was almost too hot to run in. The 10,000-meter cross-country race had been run earlier in the day, and of the 38 runners who started the race, only 23 had made it to the finish line. The rest had collapsed from heat exhaustion along the route. The newspapers had quickly dubbed Column Stadium the Cauldron, and on this day it seemed a fitting nickname.
Did you put the chickens in?
Despite the fact that no one expected him to do well, Eric threw all his energy into the race and managed to squeak into the finals. Amazingly, so did Guy Butler, the best qualifier in their heat, though turned out to be the Swiss runner Joseph Imbach, who had stunned everyone by breaking the world record for the race during the heat. Imbach ran 400 meters in 48 seconds. Wow. People were enthusiastic about his chances for winning the gold medal. That is, until the American runner Horatio Fitch topped Imbach by winning his heat in 47.8 seconds. The final was set for 7 p.m., Friday, July 11. Since a new 400-meter record had been set twice in the heats, the crowd began to gather early for the race. Eric took one of the few taxis the Americans weren't using to the stadium around 4 p.m. In his pocket was a note that had been sent to his hotel room that read, "In the old book it says, 'He who honors me, I will honor.' Wishing you the best of the success always." It was signed by the masseur for the British team, and it meant a lot to Eric. Even if most people didn't understand why he chose not to run on Sunday, some did. As Eric walked into the stadium, he reached into his pocket and rested his hand on the note. Whatever happened in the final of the 400 meters, Eric knew he had honored God first, and that was worth more than any Olympic gold. By 6:45, 6 runners were milling around the starting line: Horatio Fitch and Conrad Taylor representing the United States, Joseph Imbach of Switzerland, David Johnson of Canada, and the 2 British finalists, Guy Butler and Eric Liddell. As usual, Eric shook each runner's hand and wished the runners success in this race. Spectators couldn't help but notice Eric was 5 foot 9 inches. Was the shortest of the 6 runners. Again, anyone who knew anything about running would have known that to be good in the 400 meters, a runner needed to be tall. Eric might be a good sprinter, but for this distance, longer legs were definite advantage. Several minutes before the race was due to start, the runners drew numbers for the lane they would run in. Eric's heart sank as he pulled out a card with the number 6 on it. This meant he would be in the outside lane of the track. He would start slightly in front of the others and gradually lose that advantage as the track curved. It meant that Eric wouldn't be able to see where any of the other runners were unless they were beating him. The track at Columns Stadium was longer than most. Since it was 500 meters around, the 400-meter race would take the runners around only one of the bends in the track, with the race finishing 100 meters short of the starting line. This made running in the outside lane very difficult. Eric took his trowel from the leather pouch he carried with him, placed his feet where he wanted them to be when he started, and made marks with his toes. Then he used the trowel to dig 2 small holes for his toes, where he had marked. He could hear the familiar drone of bagpipes. As he glanced around, he saw the King's Pipers marching proudly around the inside of the track, playing the traditional Scottish tune, The Campbells Are Coming. Okay, that's the song. Eric smiled and waved to them as he put his trowel back in the leather pouch and handed it to his coach. He was the only Scotsman in the finals, and he knew the Pipers were playing for him. Suddenly, the bagpipe music faded, and the runners were called to their marks. Eric crouched at the starting line. In admiration, he glanced over at Guy Butler, who was again starting from a standing position. As he waited for the only sound that now mattered, the crack of the starter's pistol. Eric could feel every muscle in his body tense. When the pistol sounded, Eric lunged forward. He threw his head back and assumed his strange running position. His feet beat against the cinder track as he gathered speed down the back straight. As he rounded the bend in the track, the point where the runners would bunch up together, he expected to see Horatio Fitch and Joseph Imbach out in front of him. After all, they had been set new world records for the distance during their heats. When they weren't out in front, Eric threw his head back even farther and willed his legs to go even faster. In less than a minute, it was all over, and Eric was the first across the finish line. Against all odds, he had won. Eric collapsed into the arms of the British coach, totally exhausted. It was several minutes before he realized that not only had he won, but also he had set a new world record of 47.6 seconds. For the distance, he had broken the record Horatio Fitch had set in his heat by 0.2 of a second. Horatio Fitch himself had finished a distant second in the race, and somehow Guy Butler had managed to fend off the other three runners to finish in third place. After he had regained his strength, Eric climbed onto the top position of the stand, where the gold medal was draped around his neck. To his right was Horatio Fitch, and to his left, Guy Butler. Above them, the Union Jack flapped in the breeze at the top of the flagpole. Below it was the Stars and Stripes of the United States, and then another Union Jack. After the other two runners had received their medals, the band struck up God Save the King, the national anthem of Great Britain. A smile brimmed across Eric's face. Now Great Britain had another gold medal, and one she hadn't expected to win. All around him, the crowd cheered. After it was all over, Eric slipped quietly away from the crowd and headed to the dressing room. Quickly, he showered and changed clothes. He wanted to get back to the hotel as soon as possible. He'd agreed to speak at the Scots Kirk again on Sunday, and he needed time to prepare for what he was going to say. The next morning, Saturday, the applause that had been heard all over Paris after Eric's win was now resounding throughout Scotland. The newspapers that had been so critical of him when he would not run in the 100-meter sprint on Sunday were now trying to outdo each other in praising him. The Scotsman reported, "Certainly there has not been a more popular win." The crowd went into a frenzy of enthusiasm. The Edinburgh Evening News wrote, "All around the banked area, people were on their feet, cheering madly, and as if by magic, hosts of Union Jacks appeared over the heads of the raving crowd as Liddell ripped through the tape and into the arms of the Britishers who were waiting for him." The Bulletin, another Scottish newspaper, reported that Eric Liddell's win was the greatest achievement in Olympic Games so far. Eric was amused when he read the accounts in the newspapers. One day he was a coward and traitor to Scotland. The next, he was being hailed as a national hero. As he watched the remaining days of Paris Olympic Games, one thought was never far from Eric's mind. How would the Scottish people react when they found out that their top sports star was about to buy a one-way ticket to China? What would the newspapers say about him then? I guess we'll find out in the next chapter.